Daniel Carter was looking for an old tax document when he found the bank statement. He almost put it back. Then he saw the balance, $186,000. Daniel stared at the number. He checked it again. Then he looked at the name printed above it. Laura Carter, his wife. Daniel had been married to Laura for 29 years. They shared a house. They raised 2 children. They had argued about bills, celebrated promotions, survived layoffs, paid tuition, replaced broken appliances, and spent countless evenings talking about whether they had enough money for retirement. At least Daniel thought they had talked about everything, but he had never heard about this account, not once. And standing alone in that little home office, holding a piece of paper he wasn't supposed to find, Daniel began wondering how much of his life had been built around something that wasn't true. Daniel was 58 years old. For almost 30 years, he had worked at the same manufacturing plant. He wasn't rich. He wasn't important. Nobody knew his name outside the people who worked beside him. But every morning his alarm went off at 4:45, and every morning Daniel got up. When his children were young, he often left the house before they woke up. During busy seasons, he worked Saturdays, sometimes Sundays. Overtime meant extra money, and extra money meant something his family needed. When his daughter Emily needed braces, Daniel worked overtime. When his son Michael wanted to attend college, Daniel worked overtime. When the roof started leaking, Daniel worked overtime. When Laura told him they needed to tighten the budget, Daniel didn't ask her to spend less. He simply worked more. That was Daniel's answer to almost everything. Work more, earn more, provide more. He drove the same truck for 14 years. His co-workers teased him about it. One afternoon, his friend Ray slapped the hood and said, "Daniel, this thing is going to retire before you do." Daniel laughed. "As long as it starts, I'm keeping it." The truth was, Daniel could have bought another truck, but every time he considered spending money on himself, something stopped him. There was always somewhere better for the money to go. At least, that's what he told himself. Years earlier, Daniel had owned a motorcycle. It wasn't expensive, but he loved it. On Sunday mornings, before the children woke up, he sometimes rode through the countryside. No destination, no schedule, just Daniel, the road, and an hour when nobody needed anything from him. Then one year, money became tight. Laura mentioned that their savings were getting low. Daniel sold the motorcycle. He didn't tell anyone how much that hurt. When Michael asked why, Daniel shrugged. Just a motorcycle. But it wasn't just a motorcycle. It was one of the last things Daniel did simply because he enjoyed it. After that, life became work. Mortgage, tuition, groceries, insurance, repairs, weddings, emergencies, and retirement, especially retirement. Daniel had a plan. At 62, he would finally slow down. He and Laura would travel. They talked about driving through the mountains, seeing the ocean, maybe renting a small cabin somewhere for a month. 4 more years, Daniel would say. Laura would smile. 4 more years. Daniel believed he was building toward that life. Until Saturday morning, until the bank statement, until $186,000. Daniel sat down at the desk. His hands felt cold. He started going through the folder. There wasn't just one statement. There were dozens. Transfers going back years. $500, $800, $2,000, sometimes more. Daniel's stomach tightened. Then he noticed the dates. One transfer happened during a year when Laura had told him their finances were stretched thin. Daniel remembered that year. He had worked 11 Saturdays in a row. Another transfer happened just weeks before he sold his motorcycle. Daniel stared at the date. He remembered standing in the driveway as a stranger loaded the motorcycle onto a trailer. Laura had stood beside him. She knew how much he loved it, and yet this account existed. Daniel kept searching. The more he found, the worse it became. Then he found an email printed between two statements. It was from Emily, his daughter. It mentioned the account. Daniel froze. Emily knew. Then another message. Michael knew too. Daniel leaned back in the chair. His wife knew. His daughter knew. His son knew. Everyone knew, except him. For 30 years, Daniel believed he was the person holding his family together. Now, for the first time, he felt like the outsider. Laura came home shortly after 5. Daniel was sitting at the kitchen table. The statement was in front of him. Laura walked in carrying 2 grocery bags. "Can you help me with these?" Daniel didn't move. Laura looked at him. Then she saw the paper. Her expression changed. She slowly put the bags on the counter. "Daniel, what is this?" Laura didn't answer immediately. Daniel tapped the statement. $186,000, Laura. "I can explain." "Then explain." His voice wasn't loud. That made it worse. "How long?" Laura pulled out the chair across from him. "Daniel, how long have you had this account?" She looked down. "About 12 years. Daniel couldn't speak. 12 years. He finally whispered, 12? Laura nodded. "And the kids know?" Another pause. "Yes." Daniel stood up and walked toward the window. "So everybody knew except me." "It isn't what you think." Daniel laughed once. There was no humor in it. "You don't even know what I think." "Then tell me." Daniel turned around. "I think I spent my whole life worrying about this family. I think I worked when I was sick. I think I missed birthdays because somebody needed overtime covered. I think I sold things I loved because you told me money was tight." Laura's eyes filled with tears. "And all this time there was $186,000 sitting somewhere?" "Daniel, that isn't... Why didn't you tell me?" Laura didn't answer. "Why?" Finally, she said, "Because you would have spent it." Daniel stared at her. "On what?" Laura looked directly at him. "Us." Daniel said nothing. Laura stood and walked toward a cabinet. She removed a thick folder and placed it on the table. "Open it." Daniel didn't move. "Please." He opened the folder. Inside were years of records. Laura's paychecks, deposits, household budgets, savings, notes. Daniel slowly turned the pages. Laura sat beside him. "When I went back to work, we agreed my income would help with expenses." Daniel nodded. "I started putting a little aside." "Without telling me?" "Yes." "Why?" Laura took a breath. "Because every time we had extra money, you found someone who needed it." Daniel looked at her. "When Emily needed something, you gave it to Emily. When Michael had trouble, you helped Michael. When my mother needed help, you helped my mother. That's what family does." "I know," Laura said softly. "But who was taking care of you?" Daniel looked away. "I didn't need..." That's exactly what you always say. She reached into the folder and pulled out another sheet. It wasn't a bank statement. At the top, Laura had written 2 words: Daniel's retirement. Underneath was a list: motorcycle, travel, cabin, fishing trip, new truck, emergency reserve. Daniel stared at it. Laura said quietly, "That account wasn't for me." Daniel looked at her. "It was for you." For several seconds, the kitchen was completely silent. Daniel shook his head. "You lied to me." "Yes." Laura didn't defend herself. "I should have told you." Daniel looked back at the list. "Then why didn't you?" "Because I tried." Daniel frowned. Laura continued, "Do you remember when we got that tax refund 7 years ago?" Daniel nodded. "I told you to keep some of it for yourself." Daniel remembered. He had used it to help Michael buy a car. And when I got my bonus. Daniel remembered that too. Emily had been planning her wedding. "You gave it away," Laura said. She wiped her eyes. "Every single time something came to us, you gave it to somebody else." Daniel stared at the table. "I was taking care of my family." "I know." Laura reached for his hand. Daniel didn't pull away. "But Daniel, you're part of this family." That sentence landed harder than anything else she had said. "You're part of this family." Daniel couldn't remember the last time he had thought about himself that way. Later that night, Emily called. "Dad?" Daniel knew Laura had told her. "You knew." Emily was quiet. "Yes." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Mom asked us not to." Daniel sighed. "That doesn't make it better." "I know." Then Emily said something Daniel wasn't expecting. "Dad, do you remember my wedding?" "Of course." "You paid for things I never asked you to pay for." "You're my daughter." "I know. But do you remember what you told me when I thanked you?" Daniel couldn't remember. Emily did. "You said, 'What else am I going to do with money?'" Daniel closed his eyes. Emily continued, "That made me sad." "Why?" "Because you acted like there was nothing you wanted." Daniel didn't respond. "But there were things you wanted, Dad. You just convinced yourself you weren't allowed to want them." Daniel barely slept that night. He wasn't sure whether he was angry, grateful, embarrassed, or all 3. At 3 in the morning, he walked into the garage. There was an empty space near the wall where his motorcycle used to sit. He hadn't thought about that motorcycle in years. Or maybe he had. Maybe he had simply trained himself not to. Daniel sat on an old stool. For almost 30 years, he had measured his value by what he could provide. A good husband provides. A good father sacrifices. A good man doesn't complain. Those rules had guided almost his entire adult life. But somewhere along the way, sacrifice had stopped being something Daniel occasionally did. It had become his identity, and without realizing it, Daniel had slowly removed himself from his own life. Nothing changed overnight. Daniel didn't quit his job. He didn't spend the entire account. He didn't suddenly become a different person. The first change was almost embarrassingly small. The following Saturday, his supervisor asked whether he wanted an overtime shift. Daniel automatically opened his mouth to say yes. Then he stopped. No. His supervisor looked surprised. "You sure?" Daniel smiled. Yeah, I'm sure. That morning, Daniel called Ray. They had breakfast together. No reason, no emergency, no favor, just breakfast. A few weeks later, Daniel bought a used motorcycle. Laura went with him. When Daniel saw it, he walked around it 3 times. Then he looked at the price. Immediately, the old voice returned. Too much. You don't need it. Save the money. Somebody else might need it. Daniel started walking away. Laura caught his arm. Daniel. He looked at her. You're allowed. He stared at the motorcycle again. Then he smiled. I know. And this time, he bought it. 6 months later, Daniel and Laura took a trip. Not the giant retirement trip they had talked about. Just 5 days in the mountains. Daniel almost canceled twice. He worried about the hotel cost. He worried about missing work. He worried something might happen at home. Nothing happened. The world continued without him. One morning, Daniel and Laura sat outside their cabin drinking coffee. The mountain stretched in front of them. Daniel was quiet. Laura asked, "What are you thinking?" Daniel smiled. That I almost waited 4 more years for this. Laura took his hand. Daniel looked at her. We're still going to retire at 62. I know. But maybe we don't have to postpone everything until then. Laura smiled. I've been trying to tell you that for 12 years. Daniel laughed. Apparently, you have a strange way of communicating. Laura laughed too. And for the first time, the secret account became something they could talk about without pain. Months later, Emily came over for dinner. She noticed the motorcycle in the garage. She smiled. Look at you. Daniel shook his head. Don't start. At dinner, Emily asked him a question. Do you feel guilty? About what? Spending money on yourself. Daniel thought about it. Sometimes. And then Daniel smiled. I spend it anyway. Everyone laughed. But Daniel wasn't joking, because at 58 years old, he had finally learned something he wished he understood at 28. Taking care of the people you love is a beautiful thing. Sacrifice can be an expression of love. Providing for your family can give your life meaning, but love should not require you to disappear. There should still be something left of you when everyone else's needs have been met. A dream, a friendship, a Saturday morning, a motorcycle, a trip you've been postponing, a life that belongs to you too. Daniel spent 30 years believing his job was to provide for everyone else. It took a secret bank account and $186,000 for him to understand the person he had forgotten to provide for, himself.